You know, it's such a pleasure having a member of Congress join us today, the Honorable Richard McCormick from the 7th District of Georgia, a decorated Army veteran, emergency room physician, and he's joining us live from the Ronald Reagan Library in California. Congressman, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you. It's one of the greatest places to be. I love Reagan. He's one of my favorite all-time presidents. It's an honor to participate in the Economic Forum. Just for a point of contention, I was in the Marines for 16 years, served with the Army, cross-deck with airborne forces, but I was a pilot in the Marine Corps before then going into the Navy as an ER doc. So I come from an Air Force family, so I'm all sorts of confused, but really appreciate the armed services, really rejoiced in those members who have gone before us and the sacrifice they made on Memorial Day just a few days ago. So very honored to be with you today.
Congressman, what does it mean now that the Supreme Court has lifted the Biden era deportation for almost 500,000 people protection, and now that President Trump can move forward?
I think it's huge. First of all, this is going to be really interesting to see all these different things play out in court, whether it be deportations, immigration, tariffs. It seems like President Trump's getting challenged every step of the way. Now, I agree that executive orders are probably not the best way to govern, especially in the United States where we have a balanced system of governing. But there are checks and balances, and I think that we're going to try to codify some of the things that he's getting done through executive privilege. I think deporting people who came here illegally it has a different due process. Now, it does have due process, and you know the famous one that we deported somebody back to El Salvador with, he had two due process where two judges told him he had to go. Maybe not back to El Salvador, he had to go. Now, the reason he had an objection to go back to that country is that another gang wanted to do him harm, apparently, but that gang no longer exists. But I'm glad to see the Supreme Court is acting and that we're going to get some things done that really need to get done for this great nation to protect us, to protect our borders, protect us from economic harm, from child trafficking. I think hundreds of thousands of children child trafficked, and nothing was done by the Biden administration. Shame on them.
Congressman, you mentioned the legislative process. Why is it that the president doesn't use the legislative process to get these things done? He has a majority in the Senate and the House. Why not?
Well, he tries, but you know, we move at a glacial pace on purpose. You know, the Constitution was designed on purpose to be inefficient for our government. It was designed that way so that we'd become never more powerful than the people, so we wouldn't rule over them but serve them. We are here for one purpose and one purpose only: to defend their inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Everything else is just more government. Now, we have some necessary things we need to do, but the president is a high-energy president who wants to get a lot done, and he does not want to wait, and I get that. So he's going to do everything in his power to do what he believes is right for this great nation, and then he has to wait for us to catch up, because it takes a long time to come up with laws that are passed through both the Congress and then through the Senate, and then through the White House. It just takes a long time. He doesn't have that sort of patience. So he's trying to do whatever he can to right now under emergency authority, and then let us catch up to him as fast as possible.
You know, here's what fascinates me. I decided to go back and examine some of the same policies with the Biden-Harris administration, and there's no question in my mind, if Trump was pushing the student loan program and forgiving their debt, the media and the court certainly would not allow that to happen. Now, there's this argument that we have these activist judges, because Schumer has made it clear that he has appointed over 200 activist justices on the court. Are they being fair to the president, a standard that Biden did not have to deal with when he was president of the United States?
Of course. I mean, we've seen a lot of liberal judges being very activist. We saw it in voting. We saw it in Georgia, where they reapportioned the Georgia district lines just because they wanted to create another Democratic district. You see this all the time right now, especially with the liberals. They love to use activism inside the law because they don't have to vote on it. It's a great way for them to have authority. They're not constitutional rulings. If you look at most of the Supreme Court rulings and what the liberals do, they don't quote the Constitution. They quote European law, they quote some other standards, but they don't go with the Supreme Court doesn't hold up the Constitution when it comes to liberals. And that's what's really dangerous, is they have another ideology. And a lot of times it ties back into socialism or some sort of other ideology that is not American. And that's usually not good for America.
Well, what I find fascinating about that, I read recently on the president's social media where he went after Leonard Leo and others who recommended what he considered to be Supreme Court justices that don't necessarily adhere to what the president wants. And so we're not just talking about liberal activist judges, Congressman McCormick. These are people that were actually appointed by the president himself.
Yeah. Well, remember that not everything the president wants to do is constitutional. And I'm sure he doesn't think that way. He always says, hey, look, I'll defer to the Supreme Court, whatever they decide. But the president wants to get things done. He is a go-getter. He's used to doing business, and he doesn't want to wait. And sometimes that slow pace of the government is what he hates, and he doesn't wait. You know, President never is lacking of criticism or people get in the way of doing what he believes is the right thing to do. But I think the Supreme Court is there for a reason. We have to respect the balance of power. What I'm really worried about, we probably need to make a legislative effort, is make sure that the Supreme Court cannot be packed by future presidents, that it cannot be expanded past 9. That really worries me because it's been done before. FDR did it, and we want to make sure that we don't pack the courts again when they realize that they can't win by using liberal judges. And so this is really important to the future. But I think it's okay to have some checks and balances. And I know that the president, I love what he does. And I appreciate what he does, but if the president has too much power, the next president, who may be a liberal, will do way worse things. And so we want to make sure we always have those checks and balances for when those things happen.
An exceptional point. You know, Elon Musk has left the administration, and his parting shot was his harsh criticism of the budget that you and your colleagues just voted for by one mere vote. Certainly, Congressman Massey is pretty consistent. He feels that we're going over the cliff quickly. But he said the bill cannot be beautiful and bold. It can only be one. And that the president, in pushing this bill, undermined the goal of DOGE, which is to cut government spending to ensure that we don't go over the financial cliff.
Yeah, the interesting thing about DOGE is we can get a lot of those done in the rescission process with the president's help and there's voting on those line item things. It's kind of like, it's not really a line item veto, but it helps us get rid of a lot of that waste. But that's only, DOGE only appropriated, I think, $160 billion. That's a drop in the bucket. Man, that's about half, that's like even a half a year of deficit spending right now. Deficit spending. We have some much bigger problems. I agree with Elon. We need to be much more aggressive. I'm hoping the Senate will strip out SALT, which basically rewards liberal states like New York and California, adding $385 billion of deficit spending next year alone, which we're increasing our deficit spending by $415 billion next year. It'll be up to 456 the next year. That's not taking care of business. That's not addressing the deficit problem, the debt problem. That's why we got downgraded by Moody's. It's going to affect the prime rate. It's going to make everything more expensive. It's going to create some inflation. It's not good. It hasn't happened yet, but it's very, very real and potential. So I agree with Elon. I think we need to be more responsible. I'm hoping the Senate sends us back a more responsible package, strips out some IRA components, strips out the SALT, and we get back to a deficit neutral, at least, bill, because we eventually need to get to paying off some of this debt.
What do you say to your colleague, Congressman Tom Massey, who says that the bill that was just passed is Biden's bill on steroids.
Yeah, well, it's not on steroids, but it's definitely not a good bill in regards to debt and deficit. I love Thomas Massey, but the problem is if we voted against this and it ends up in the Democrats' hands, it ends up way worse. We don't get what we want. So we have an increase in taxes that would burden businesses and families all over the United States. The economy was slow. What we found when we originally passed the TCJA, which was prior to the Biden administration, you actually had lower taxes and an increased revenue source because businesses expanded. Biden's administration actually was rewarded by that. And it was passed during the Trump administration. What Massey's referring to is the IRA and SALT and other provisions that basically added on to the debt that we never got rid of. So what happened back in 2008 when we had the housing crisis and we had this huge spike in spending, unlike World War II, where we came down with our deficit spending after World War II because we didn't have the emergency anymore, we never came down from the 2008 spending levels. Then we did it again when COVID came along. We spiked this huge record amount of increase in spending, and we never right-sided that again. So that's what he's referring to. We never got back to a responsible revenue source matching our spending, and that's why we're in a big trouble right now. It's going to come to a head soon.
Congressman Richard McCormick, who represents the 7th District of Georgia, former Marine, emergency room physician, joins us from the Reagan Library. I'm Armstrong Williams. This is Your Voice, Your Future, and we'll be back. You know, Congressman McCormick, I go back to the days of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his New Deal. In his first 100 days, he got 77 statutes in place, all through the deliberative process of the U.S. Congress. There's a reason why the process is deliberative, because can you imagine in a courtroom if the process was not deliberative? You say that the president is fast, but the kinds of things that we're negotiating and the kinds of things that we're trying to accomplish for our country and around the world, you must do it in a deliberative way.
Yeah, I agree with you. Matter of fact, I'm reading a book right now on the rise of Lyndon B. Johnson. What they did was they used government money to buy votes all over the United States. That's why FDR was so effective and so long-lived as president. But here's the problem. I agree with you 100%. I would love to see President Trump accomplish all the things he wants to accomplish. The problem is that we don't limit that executive privilege, that executive power. The next president is going to be horrible when they apply something we don't like. And this goes back to biblical principles, man. You remember when the prophets warned them when Israel said, we want a king. The most effective and efficient form of government is a monarch or a dictator or a theocracy where one person makes all the calls. It works really fast and it's really great until you get a bad one. Then it's the worst possible thing you can imagine. So just imagine that you have a great president now and you're getting things done and you love it, but watch out because you set that precedence and bad things will happen in the next presidency. But I get you. It's frustrating to wait on government to change the way we want it to, especially when you have a democracy, which is the worst form of all governments, except every other, as Winston Churchill once said.
Yeah, but the reason why Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal exists today is because of that deliberative process. But Congressman, you know, I saw you on TMZ recently. That means your star is certainly rising when you're on TMZ. What initially inspired you to take such a strong stance in favor of cryptocurrency?
You know, cryptocurrency, I resisted for a long time. I got my MBA, I got an MD. I've actually sat and looked at cryptocurrency being mined inside my district. I've talked to people who created cryptocurrency. I've read books on it, and I still have a hard time getting my arms around it. I'm sure a lot of people feel the same way. Warren Buffett still won't invest in it. He doesn't like it because he doesn't understand it. It's very difficult to get your mind around something. But when I finally accepted that you basically have to have faith that has value, just like you do in the American currency, that is backed by something. But the difference between cryptocurrency and the American government backing a currency is significant. But once you get a coin like Bitcoin, for example, just one example, and you have enough billionaires invest in it, that thing is not going anywhere. It will be buoyed up just like any stock. But if you think about our stock market and the way we do speculative trading, and the PE ratios get all out of whack, eventually they adjust. And that's why you have to look at it, in my opinion, as an investment that you have to be willing to take losses and gains. And if you're looking long term, it really outperforms the market. So that's why I kind of think that it's fine. It's decentralized. It's still accountable, and we still do have some regulations, but I think it has a future. It's shown to stand the test of time, at least for now. But you got to be careful because there's a lot of cryptocurrencies out there that will not be good in the future and in the past.
So this is a two-part question. Can you break down the key objectives of the FIT 21 Act and how it aims to support the importance of innovation? And what are the one concerns, what would you think are the core concerns driving your opposition to central bank digital currencies like CBDCs?
Yeah, I think I was just talking to a bunch of economists about stablecoin, for example. One of the problems we have with the American currency right now, it just got downgraded by Moody's. This is the second time in 2 years it's been downgraded. That's because we're so far out of whack. We're, with 30% deficit spending per year. We're approaching $37 trillion of debt, another $1 trillion every 100 days. So we're looking for something to stabilize the market. Now, we're going to have some stability because our economy is going maybe up to 4% this year. But overall, we have to be careful that we regulate but not overregulate. It's just like with AI, for example, or the internet previously. If you regulate something too heavy, it's not competitive. It has too much red tape and it becomes inefficient and ineffective. There's where we try to find that fine line of balance in what we're doing in the government, that we don't get in the way, but we don't make something overly dangerous and harmful to people who invest in it. So always trying to fine tune it. I don't know all the minutia of that yet. We are looking into it big time. But here's the problem. You look at the average age of a congressman or a senator, for example, most of those guys have a hard time turning on their phones. They don't understand AI. They don't understand crypto. And when they're talking about regulation, they're relying on 20-something-year-olds to write and review laws that they have to vote on that will have a cumulative effect in the future. And unrealized consequences from our laws are one of the biggest problems we have with historical landmark cases, because we have these unintended consequences from laws that we passed that we never intended, but because we didn't understand the technology or whatever we were dealing with, it happened anyways.
Well, I can tell you that people, no matter what, still fear the fact that crypto is unstable and it's a tool for speculation. It's still unregulated. I don't know what it's going to take for Congress or anybody to change that, but there's a reality. But there's also a genuine bipartisan momentum, or maybe there's not. Maybe the question I should ask you is whether there's a genuine bipartisan momentum in Congress to establish fair and forward-thinking crypto regulations.
There is, but I would say that the problem is most of them just don't understand cryptocurrency very well. They don't understand its value. They don't understand how it's so volatile. It was supposed to come in to actually stabilize a market, a currency, if you will, that wouldn't go up and down with markets and speculation. But ironically, it is probably more volatile than the United States dollar. That's why people should look at it. I think it was good that what you just mentioned actually resonates with me, because I think I do look at it as an investment. Now, I'm not investing in cryptocurrency, but the people who do, they're holding on to it. If you look at Bitcoin, nobody's spending it. They're accumulating it because it's becoming more and more valuable. That means it's like a stock. People are holding it because they believe it has real value. That should say something to you, especially when it's a lot of very wealthy people that are doing it, people who actually have read on it and understand it. That's what's really impressive. And so I think you'll see it. If you handle it like an investment rather than a currency, I think you'll have a better understanding. Now, stablecoin will be a little bit different. Each cryptocurrency has a different objective. I think stablecoin will have a more of a, or should I say, less volatile profile. So you'll have to look at it like different stock investments, like mutual funds that some are more conservative. They're going to have less gains, but they're also going to be more stable. So look at cryptocurrency kind of like that. and I think it'll be more useful to most people who want to simplify its understanding.
You know, the federal trade courts put a stop to the tariffs. The federal appeal court took the pause off and the tariffs continue. But no matter what the president does, no matter what the courts may do, there's one fact. The markets are very volatile and unstable. It is the worst kind of recipe for the markets, Congressman McCormick.
You know what, though? Here's what's genius about President Trump. I remember in his first term, I remember watching him handle the market with tweets. When the market started to superheat, this is all pre-COVID, when it got too fast and was turned over, he would tweet something to slow it down. And then when it slowed down too much, he'd tweet something to speed it back up. And he'd go after the Federal Reserve to lower the interest rates, which he's doing again right now. He is brilliant at manipulating the market to keep it at a sweet spot. That's what he's really good at. He's a business guy. He understands that. I've never seen any president do that ever before. I think probably since Calvin Coolidge, who understands economics probably better than most, who famously said the business of America is business, who famously cut the budget down to $3 billion. He was the last president to really reduce significantly the budget of the United States, divested from as many things as he could, and the economy just hummed. And then he warned the people about speculation in the market, which led to the stock market crash and the Great Depression. Trump is brilliant at handling what affects the market. Literally, the faith in the market, the faith in our currency will be affected by the president's attitude, and that's what he's really good at. So more power to him. I think it's going to be interesting to see if that continues to stick as he gets closer to the end of his term. But right now, I think he's pretty brilliant at it. And I think those tariffs are going to actually come back and really benefit us. If you think zero tariffs for all these countries that have been just screwing us by at least 10-point margins, for him to get those people to come to the table, that's going to be a boom for us. It's going to be huge for our economy, for our production, for even price points. It's not going to create inflation, but actually just the opposite. It's going to make things more affordable overall.
You know, my conscience speaks to me now. While the president is brilliant, many of his critics say that he has a conflict of interest because he also benefits personally and his family from the market because he's also invested in benefits from these coins, especially his Dogecoin. Do you see that as a conflict for the president?
I think you could definitely say that. I mean, when you look at historically, you can see there's been, now this is not unique to President Trump. You can see Hunter Biden selling artwork that was trashed for millions of dollars. That's benefiting. You can see what he did to basically money launder with his family, that he just pardoned carte blanche for anything that historically might have done. That's obviously something that needed to be addressed. But if you look at President Trump, at least he's transparent about it. Now, if we need to make laws against it, so be it. If we think it's unethical or illegal or should be illegal, so be it. I, as a physician, cannot practice because it's considered fiduciary. Same thing with lawyers or accountants in Congress. But if the president shouldn't do something, we need to make a law. Otherwise, it is considered legal, and he's very transparent about it. He doesn't apologize. He's way different than any other president in the way he approaches this. He's way more accessible to the media. He does things differently to his own tune. And it doesn't seem to be affecting his popularity. So really, you could say, well, he's being Machiavellian, but you could say, if you don't like it, then we need to make a law against it. But good luck right now, because if he's riding a popularity wave, that's not going to change. But each person has to decide what their legacy is going to be. Reagan, I mean, he's one of my all-time favorites. Humble guy, charming, great sense of humor, had a simple platform from 63 to 89. Smaller government, defeat communism. Pretty simple. And he delivered it in a way that almost won 50 out of 50 states, won by 12.5%. Nobody's seen anything like that before or since in modern history. But nobody comes to the presidency in the same way. If you look at every president has a unique personality, but we all have to be authentic. Anybody who copies Trump underperforms dramatically. Look at the people who underperformed him that were trying to be like him. There's only one Trump. He's going to do it his way. And if we think it's wrong, we're going to make a law against it.
You know, he's definitely transparent. My final question to you, and I'm so thankful to have you on today as a member of Congress and also having served this country. What will be the outcome, given your military background and your military intel, as well as intelligence intel, on the chaos that continues to escalate between Russia and Ukraine?
You know, I'm one of those guys that maybe looks at this different. I'm a big military. I used to teach evolutionary warfare, amphibious warfare. And I really am fascinated by it. Plus, I have a vested interest. I think that the stability of Europe is essential to us. I mean, we don't have too many friends in this world right now, and Europe's very important to us. We signed a treaty with NATO supporting Ukraine, and Ukraine gave up their nuclear arms with the idea that if somebody invades them, we would come to their support. That's a treaty. I stand by that. When I tell my kids, you go out for the sports team, you finish the year. You don't just go back on your word. Let's start there. But secondly, this is a top 5 nation in the world in natural resources. Do you really want Russia to have access to more uranium, aluminum, steel, titanium, 70% of Europe's grain? That would be strategically really bad for us, cost us trillions of dollars into the future. This is a small investment. And quite frankly, this could have been over in 1 year had we done it right. This is where it drives me crazy that people don't have better military insight when it comes to this war. We have a $50 trillion economy between us and Europe. Russia has a $2 trillion economy. We should be dominating them. We should be putting massive sanctions on them, putting pressure on India not to buy the oil to fuel this war, to make sure that Europe doesn't buy that oil back from India to fuel this war. We crippled them economically. We supply Ukraine with all the weapons they need. This war would have been over long ago, and we could have gone on with life, and it would have been okay. But instead, we continue to draw it out like we did in Vietnam and Korea with limited warfare. We had the same problem in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's why it went on way too long until we took the gloves off and had surge ops. The top-tier power in the world, which is the United States, had problems with third world armies because we played limited warfare. If we would just take the gloves off and supply Ukraine, sanction Russia, this would have been over a long time ago. I hope we can get to that if we cannot come to a peace process soon. President Trump has done everything he can to put pressure on both sides to come to the table. But as you know, Putin has a lot of pride, and he believes in the meat grinder, and he believes he can grind these down to nothing and get other people to give up before his country gives up, because he has basically a dictator's authority.
Congressman, thank you so much for joining us from the late Reagan Library, and I look forward to having you live in our broadcast studio here in Washington, D.C. All the best, and thank you.
It's always a pleasure. You're quite the gentleman, Armstrong. I love you, man. Love what you do. Appreciate everything that you've accomplished in your life, and it is a pleasure to be with you today. Semper Fidelis.
Thank you, my brother. When we come back, Bruce Fein and Sam Faddis will join the conversation, and we're going to ask the question, who is Vladimir Putin? We'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. Welcome back to the broadcast. It's always a pleasure to have two of my favorite guests, Sam Faddis and Bruce Fein, joining us. Let me start with you, Bruce. Give us an overview of what the courts, the Supreme Court, has taken, given back to the president, the impact it will have on deportation, the impact it would have on tariffs, and the rule of law.
Well, we need to go through them separately because the court hasn't ruled the same on all of them. At present, with regard to the tariffs, there have been 2 lower court decisions that initially held that he could not operate under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose blanket tariffs country by country because there's another trade law that requires a more deliberative process. That issue has been stayed by one court, but it's clearly headed for the Supreme Court. My view is that the court will rule against Mr. Trump for the same reason why the court repeatedly ruled against Mr. Biden for trying to do all these student loan cancellations, having huge major consequences for the economy without having Congress expressly authorize the same in language in the statute. Now, there's in the immigration field, we have the Supreme Court unanimously stating that under the Alien Enemies Act, Mr. Trump could not deport Mr. Abrego Garcia without any hearing and had to facilitate his return from El Salvador. Today, another area of immigration, the Supreme Court has said that Mr. Trump may cancel temporary protected status for about 500,000 immigrants who came in under President Biden. So it's a mixed picture at present. And there's an enormous discretion that the court has instructed should be paid to the president in foreign affairs, but it's not limitless. And I believe the courts have found rather difficult to accept the idea that as we speak, Venezuela is conducting a military invasion of the United States sufficient to trigger the Alien Enemies Act. So we have a mixed bag. At present, the administration has not flouted any decision of the Supreme Court. I think that's a source of comfort, since some of his subordinates have suggested they might throw the rule of law back at the courts. But we don't have all the court decisions in yet, still in flux in many respects.
Sam Faddis, I know Trump likes referring to Putin as his friend. I don't think he's his friend. I think Putin is in his own universe. I think we have to remind people of the history of the world, whether it's Stalin, who killed 60 million people on his watch, or whether it's Mao Zedong in China, who killed 100 million people during his lifetime, even to the point where, and he was doing it to his own people, where they were eating each other's hearts, cannibalism. We know the history of Adolf Hitler, but we've seen these kinds of monsters throughout our history. And while our president may think that he's negotiating with Putin, Putin is absolutely doing something else that none of us understand. So you can tell us exactly who Vladimir Putin is and what we need to understand about him.
Well, thank you very much, because that's not much of a challenge. That just, look, is Putin Trump's friend? Obviously not, and why Trump characterizes him that way, I assume, is part of his negotiating tactic. Putin is a hard-nosed, brutal guy. I'm not a fan. You know, he's a relic of the old Soviet Union. And Putin is going to do whatever he regards as best for Russia, which means for him, drive the hardest bargain possible at all times, and only concede when he's been forced to concede. So this, I don't think that means we cannot negotiate with the man, or we can't ultimately resolve the war in Ukraine, but it's certainly not going to be because he's a nice guy or wishes us well or any of that. It's going to be because we finally put together a deal that he will buy, that he thinks is the best he can get.
How much do you think, I saw what the Secretary of State is revoking and putting into question a lot of the Chinese visas before they are approved to come to the United States. How much do you think that the Chinese have infiltrated our military, our educational institutions, our agriculture, our technology? How damaging do you think it is?
It's catastrophic. I hate the word existential because it's overused all the time, but it's really an existential threat. They're stealing everything that isn't nailed down. And look, this is not about ethnicity or racism or anything else. If just talk about Chinese students, if you're a Chinese student and you're in the United States at a university, you will do whatever Chinese intelligence tells you to do, not because you love communism or want Xi to succeed, but because you have no choice. It's the ultimate offer you cannot refuse. They have infinite levers over you, your family back in China, your future, everything else. So if you got hundreds of thousands of Chinese students in universities, which you do, it doesn't really make any difference how they feel about communism or the United States. Unless they're extraordinarily brave and almost suicidal, they are all going to do whatever Chinese intelligence tells them to do to some degree. Doesn't mean they're all spying, because they may have access to nothing the Chinese care about. But if they have access to anything the Chinese care about, they will be forced to give it to them. Again, no matter how much they wish that was not the reality. So from a counterintelligence perspective, if you will, the first thing you got to do to get a handle on that is you are going to have to dramatically reduce the number of such students. There is nobody on the planet who can possibly keep track of the number of Chinese nationals that we have here on our soil. There are no such resources possible to field. At this point, we cannot begin to get a handle on the threat.
You know, Bruce, this is a very tricky topic when it comes to Harvard and the anti-Semitism and what Trump and his White House are demanding. And we know that Harvard has submitted thousands of documents, but it's never enough. And whether or not they're indoctrinating these kids that lead to this anti-Semitism, this hatred of Jews, this hatred of America. We know you rarely see an American flag on Harvard's campus, but yet you see the LGBTQ flag, you see the Ukrainian flag, you even have books in the Harvard Library of some of the most radical communists and socialists in the history of modern man. But how do you balance out what Trump is trying to do, how it impacts a lot of what the Supreme Court has pushed back on, saying that the president did not have the authority to revoke the visas? Where is the balance here?
I think the balance depends upon the facts. I don't believe everything I read in the newspapers. I don't believe everything I get from AI. That's why we have a court system. We have these issues that you've addressed now being adjudicated in court. The allegations are serious. The defenses are not frivolous. If the evidence is forthcoming, then there's certainly justification for revoking visas for people who are doing things that are either illegal or are aimed to sabotage the policies of the United States. But simply exercising free speech is not illegal. But if it goes too far and it incites action and hatred, that may cross the line. And that's why we have a third branch. I always remind, we have a fundamental principle of law. No man can be a judge in his own case. So we don't permit the executive branch to judge its own powers. The judicial branch is not infallible because it has human institutions can err. But that's the optimal way which we try to get to the bottom of what ought to be done. Now, one of the things I believe that is needed, having myself being tainted by Harvard, is that it's important to set up rival institutions. There's nothing that prevents people who have money, maybe Elon Musk, establish your own university. Build it, hire your own teachers, you write your own curriculum, have your own student enrollments, provide competition. That's the best way to defeat Harvard, is have a university that's superior. Doesn't require anything more than that. And that's the way in which the private market works when it comes to business commodities. You build them at a mousetrap.
That doesn't change the students that want to go there and get that Harvard education and degree. They are still facing those challenges, even if you build your own university, Bruce.
But they
got to change that culture.
You don't have to enroll in Harvard. There are plenty of kids. 2,500 universities.
But many do. Let's be realistic.
Many
like
do.
you graduated from Harvard.
But I understand. But People have reputations that wane over time. At one time, IBM was everything. Now it's very little because its reputation was overcome. Harvard is not going to be the #1 university forever. You can have people who develop universities who have a greater and attract more important...
Harvard is as old as America.
I know. It doesn't mean it's going to live forever. People at 200-year institutions have died if they don't retain their vitality. And if Harvard doesn't have the competitive incentive, there are a lot of people who will say, I don't want to go to Harvard. It's not the only place you can get enrolled. There are a lot of smart people who are not enrolled in Harvard.
Bruce Fein and Sam Faddis and I will be back. This is Your Voice, Your Future. I'm Armstrong Williams. Don't go away.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
You know, I read a fascinating article by Sam Faddis, where he, in his A&D magazine, where he had this harsh critique of the Washington Post for allegedly portraying the CIA's recent initiatives as revitalization efforts. Sam, you've got to elaborate on your concerns regarding this portrayal. And it's also interesting how the mainstream media plays in this. They push this because you mentioned that the CIA's current strategies may be more about public relations than substantive reform, and maybe talk about the specific actions or policies that leads to this kind of conclusion. And why would the mainstream media, like the Washington Post, engage in this kind of propaganda and misinformation?
Well, let's start with this. The CIA is broken. I'm a big believer in the Central Intelligence Agency and its necessity. I think it's the single most important agency we got in the federal government when it comes to national security, quite honestly. It's not getting the job done. It's nowhere close to getting the job done. The pace of operations is, well, look, the place has barely got a heartbeat, so that's just a harsh reality. The Washington Post article that ran a few days ago basically says, yeah, we have a whole bunch of problems. We're not getting the job done, we being CIA. It's not our fault. It's because of technological changes. We're getting a handle on it. And essentially the subtext here is the worst thing you could possibly do right now, therefore, is make any major changes or replace any personnel because we're the only people that can figure out how to fix it. And then there's some other bells and whistles, like it doesn't really matter because open source information tells us everything anyway. I mean, I'm just going to tell you, based on the folks I speak to and my experience. I mean, this is essentially it should have been written by the Public Affairs Office of CIA. I mean, it ought to be, frankly, have required a banner that said it was they were paid by CIA to run it, one of those disclaimers. I mean, that's exactly what this is. And the Post, which I think at least once upon a time used to be a great newspaper, ought to be ashamed of themselves. I mean, they are lapping this up. I mean, the CIA works for us. It isn't getting the job done. We aren't going to fix it by pretending otherwise. And you aren't going to fix it. You're going to have to make dramatic and significant changes, starting with major personnel changes. Just like you had a military unit that wasn't cutting it, what's the first thing you'd do? Fire the commanding officer and the sergeant major and go from there. And go back to basics, and that's.
Well, let me continue with you here. I mean, you have a lot of experience in the intelligence community. I mean, what do you see are the necessary reforms to address the issues you've highlighted within the CIA, and how do you suggest the media should approach reporting on the intelligence agencies to ensure accountability without compromising the national security that we all hold so dear?
Well, I think you can tell a tremendous amount of truth about the intelligence community, everything, frankly, that any average citizen needs to know without going anywhere close to what constitutes classified information. You and I talk all the time about the intelligence community. I don't talk about the names of sources, specific methodologies, pieces of technology. All of that's irrelevant. The organization is broken. It isn't getting the job done. We are recruiting the wrong people. Some of that is DEI. Some of that predates DEI, and we just decided we wanted to be kinder and gentler and in a very rough, unfortunately, unforgiving business. Training has been softened. We want everybody to sort of get a participation ribbon and to have an outward bound experience. Well, that doesn't help you when you're dropped into a war zone and you either stay alive or you die or you get all your sources killed. You either know what you're doing or you don't know what you're doing. The bottom line is here, there has to be, the ethos of the agency always was before, mission accomplishment. That is not an aspiration. That's not a like, let's try really hard, guys. That's a, we accept nothing other than we accomplished the mission. Whatever it took, however long it took, if the first plan didn't work, then we need a new plan. But there is no fail because it's too important. All of that has gone by the boards. And you got senior people sitting over at headquarters in Langley in very senior positions running what's supposed to be a spy organization who are not, and they're not operators. They were never trained to be, they've never recruited a source, they've never run an op, and most of them rarely leave Northern Virginia. They don't know anything about this business. We're sort of playing at something, and it's, you know, it is not something you can play at. You got to get serious about it, or it should just, you know, pack up and go home.
You know, Bruce, when you think about the constitutional question at the heart of Trump versus CASA and its challenge to birthright citizenship restrictions, you know, is this the eyes of June and not the eyes of March?
Yeah. I'd rather have it be neither the eyes of either one, right?
Yes.
I think that if you look at the Supreme Court's decisions, their stays, and especially Chief Justice Roberts' rather clear message that the court is the one that has the final say, and the executive branch does not interpret the Constitution as the definitive word, that the likelihood is probably that the court will say birthright citizenship is required by Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, but it may also say that its enforcement cannot be at a district court level with a nationwide injunction. It has to move state or district by district. But I do not see this court, which has focused so much on the plain language of the Constitution, ignoring what has been the accepted understanding for 170 some years. And I believe that the consequences will not be overwhelming, that it may cause the possibility that Congress, in its own power under Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, re-examined by statute, not executive order, whether to limit in some ways birthright citizenship. That's where I think we're going, but it seems to me very improbable that the court will uphold the executive order as issued.
You know, Sam Faddis, why would Israel, and I'm going to say tacitly, agree to a ceasefire that the Trump administration is asking for 2 months when they have no intentions of adhering to what they're agreeing to now?
I would assume because it gives them 60 days to get ready for whatever they plan to do next.
And what is that?
There's the $60,000 question. I mean, when we're talking about anything connected to Gaza, you know, the question is, what we know definitively is that the system that the status quo that existed prior to Hamas's invasion of Israel obviously failed, and no rational person in the Israeli government would accept going back. Okay, so let's just go back to that and let Hamas control Gaza for the foreseeable future and hope it turns out better. That's a non-starter. Okay, that's the easy part. Now the question is, what are you going to do? Are you going to occupy Gaza entirely and take on the job of policing Gaza Israelis? Are you going to try magically to whisk these people somewhere else, which Trump suggested? No easy answers there. Nobody in the Middle East wants the Palestinians in any significant number. I would guess the Israelis are going to have some sort of yet sort of expanded, almost, I was going to say demilitarized zone, but security zone inside Gaza to give themselves more standoff. But we will see.
Bruce, why are nationwide injunctions by federal courts becoming such a flashpoint in our legal system?
Well, because at a district court level, it's thought somewhat inappropriate for one district, a small component of the whole country, issuing a decision that binds the entire country. Now, the argument in favor of these nationwide injunctions, and I must recall that when Biden was president, the conservatives got nationwide injunctions against the student loan forgiveness. So both sides play it when it's views in their favor. But if you think about the recent argument made in the U.S. Supreme Court on this issue, if there's not a nationwide injunction, you oftentimes could have a checkerboard system of law in the sense that if the administration does not appeal a loss at the district court level, it never gets to the Supreme Court. So it could forum shop around the country, and you could have different district courts and courts of appeals in different ways, and the administration never takes the case to the U.S. Supreme Court, and we don't have uniform law. So it creates the possibility of chaos. We now have Congress considering the issue. I think Congress clearly has the power to limit nationwide injunctions by district courts, but both sides have used it in the past when they thought that there was executive overreach.
Sam Faddis, how can others read or subscribe to A&D magazine, which I think is some of the best reporting investigatively that I read anywhere?
We're on Substack, so it's andmagazine.substack.com, andmagazine.substack.com. Appreciate it.
I want to thank Congressman Richard McCormick, Sam Faddis, and Bruce Fein for joining us for this edition of Your Voice, Your Future. I'm Armstrong Williams, and enjoy the rest of your evening.